Chibuzor. Very good morning to you, gentlemen.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. C. Good morning, Lagos.
Good morning, Zibby. Good morning, good morning, Chibuzor. Good morning, Lagos.
All right, let's start off with the Daily Trust. The Nigerian Medical Association has thrown its weight behind the removal of fuel subsidies, but they've also stressed that money saved as a result of its implementation should be channeled to the National Health Insurance Program in order to ensure access to all Nigerians for universal health coverage.
Okay, so thank you. So the Nigerian Medical Association over the weekend made a strong representation that money to be saved or supposedly should be saved from the termination of the fuel subsidy program should be channeled solely towards the National Health Insurance Scheme. Now, on paper, that's a reasonable suggestion. However, there are a number of it. One, the fuel subsidy program, even if it ends, there is still the enduring issue of who's going to pay for the crude oil that will be refined into petrol, because there has to be a cost, and that cost has to be borne by someone. The refineries are not working. We already know that there's no point of a flooding the issue. Now, even if the new refinery down the Lekki corridor comes on stream, how is it getting the crude oil to be refined? Is it going to buy the crude oil? And if if the refinery will not buy the crude oil, who's buying it? Now, so that's one big if, or two big ifs. We then have the fact that we have many sectors of the economy that need urgent funding. Health is one of them, and I dare say it is extremely critical to every Nigerian, irrespective of social or economic class. However, we must remember that education is also a sector that needs urgent spectacle intervention. So I'm not sure how the NMA truly expects that any and all savings from the fuel subsidy regime will go solely to health. I'm not sure how that's going to happen. I'm not even sure 10% of any of the savings will go to health, because you also need to look at the pattern of funding for the health sector. Take the budget over the past 10 years. Has the health sector ever gotten 14% or even 13%? It's nothing. So if you haven't gotten that from your normal budgetary allocations and planning over a decade or more, why do you suddenly expect that if there are any savings, everything will go to health? It's not. There's no precedent for that. There's nothing you can point to in our recent past or even in our present that will suggest that the incoming administration is going to do that.
But what if, Mr. Steve, sorry to interrupt you, but what if the NMA is looking at the current situation of the health sector in the country, doctors living in their droves and so on, and maybe this could be an incentive to bring some level of sanity to the health sector?
So I agree with you, and I did agree to that. The health sector needs funding, it needs intervention. However, will all the savings go to health? Unlikely. I don't see it happening.
So this is almost unrealistic from the NMA?
So I think it's shooting for the sky, missing the sky, and getting the top of the tree branches. So what they're saying in effect, or what I think they're saying is, look, whenever the savings do come out, allocate at least some of it to the health sector to address a number of issues. However, even if we were to pour all the savings into the health sector, it's not going to address a number of issues. One, we've been dealing with inflation at crazy rates. So the Naira is steadily losing value every single day, month on month, year on year. So what would be a proper living wage for a doctor or for a nurse or a pharmacist or for a dental surgeon? That such a professional would be encouraged or incentivized to remain in Nigeria and ignores the temptations or the opportunities to travel abroad. Now, that having been said, right, you also have the issue of poor and inadequate funding and equipping of the existing hospitals, teaching hospitals, primary health centers, and the like. You also have to address the fact that it would appear that in the next 5 to 10 years, we may see a decline in the number of people who sign up to study the medical sciences or any of the associated disciplines. So it's a real big gap. And for the health sector to be truly sorted out, the incoming administration has to figure out and has to reach a conclusive plan with the private sector to turn around that industry. There are people with funds who are waiting to enter the Nigerian economy from different sectors. But what they need to see is a clear regulatory landscape. They need to be sure there will be no policy flip-flops. They need to be sure that whatever money they bring in, they can take it out easily. And also, they would like to see a harmonized forex rate. So these are all pressing issues for the incoming administration, and I can only wish them the very best.
The WhatsApp number is 0809 444 981. You can also tweet at Smooth981, and we're also streaming live on YouTube. So you can catch the live stream, Smooth981 FM Lagos, even post a comment on there as well.
All right, let's take our next story, and this is coming from The Nation. Now, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development, Dr. Nasir Sani Gwarzo, stated on behalf of the government that Nigerians in Sudan should not self-evacuate to the Egyptian border.
Okay, we're still on this issue, obviously, and there's a larger picture of the Sudanese crisis, which obviously is impacting Nigeria, as well as the entire Eastern African sub-region, and has some impact on the entire world. So where does it bother us directly? Our citizens who are currently in Sudan who need to come out of Sudan. Last week, Nigeria joined, I think it was last week, Nigeria joined most of the other countries in the world to try to actually move out a lot of their citizens after one of the many ceasefires that have been declared in Sudan at the moment. And we had the first tranche of Nigerians, I think, arriving over the weekend, and they came via Egypt. Obviously, that process has gone through a lot of, there's been a lot of stories around, there have been a lot of comments, a lot of story, a lot of media coverage around the entire evacuation process, how it's not gone smoothly, how much it has cost, how it's taken a lot of people to how long it has taken, how much it has cost, how inconvenient it has been for Nigerians, and all that. But yes, while I would say that Nigeria isn't the only one in that basket, I think unfortunately we've tried to make, as usual, we've made our usual approach to things, and it looks like ours is less clumsy than most of the other world, or most of the other states that have to evacuate their people. So obviously they are being advised, the people who are stuck at the border, the Egyptian border, which is the route of choice to evacuate most of the Nigerians out of Sudan, have been advised not to self-evacuate. Largely, and this is actually true because, and this is actually important because it's for the evacuation to happen smoothly, given the situation at hand. There needs to be some clarity about who is in charge of what and how things are happening. We had the issue with some of the Nigerian students that were stranded previously because of not having proper exit documents, and that had caused its own issue with the Egyptian government, and some students had supposedly stated to have disappeared into Egypt, and who are being tracked. But here while the entire issue is not being raised here, what seems to be focused on in this story is how much it's going to cost and the entire logistics of moving around. But I think what we should be focused on actually the humanitarian aspect, which is how does it impact the people. I would not advise anybody to try and self-evacuate at this stage. I think if you've gotten as far as the point where you have been counted and you've been put as part of the evacuation program as a Nigerian citizen, I think you just wait it through and go through the entire process, because things over there can change fast and quick and in negative direction if nobody's sure of where your situation or status is. So here's while there's a lot of focus on how much it costs into Egypt, the ride across the Nile and all the logistics around it, I think the focus at the end of the day is getting those people to a safe destination as quickly as possible. Like I said, we will probably be able to talk about all the things around the evacuation and how we can do things better and how we can even keep a better track with our citizens who are out there in the future, who are out in various countries in the future. But now I think the entire priority is to get people out and basically try to stop people from panicking and trying to sort their own issues out at this point. If they've gotten that far. So, hey, we're hoping that the Nigerian government gets the last of our citizens out of Sudan and into more safer climes. And we avoid as much controversies as possible while going through that process. Yeah, that's what I can say at this point, really, because it's what it is. I think we just make it in and out at this point.
So, sorry, quick question. What's the propriety of the federal government insisting that Nigerians should not self-evacuate if they truly care for the safety of their lives or poverty? Why should the government say it belongs to tell them if the government is not prepared to do everything within its power to make it?
So, Mr. C.
Sorry, you cannot compel people to stay in conflict-stricken area if they don't understand. So it's fine if you have limitations. They want to do it themselves. You then say no. Something has to give.
So what I would say is that given the situation and given the way some of those countries operate, it would be very challenging for individuals to be able to self-evacuate at this point. The major challenges for safety, and you do not get into the hands of people who just want to take advantage of the current problems and issues. For instance, I think it was last week, we heard about how in fact, this wasn't true Egypt, but some of the other border prices, I think across Ethiopia, one of the other countries that actually increased their entry fees across their border fees and border charges because of the large number of people that wanted to exit through those periods. And the truth is that whenever you have this kind of situations, you always have people who are going to take advantage. And while, yes, for any individual who has the money to pay across, the problem shouldn't, if they have the money to pay across and get across safely, then it's fine for me. But the problem is that you're going to have people who are going to take advantage, who are not going to provide the service, who are going to get this people stuck, and these people are going to get frustrated and into deeper problems. So while like some of my friends will say, Nigerians have learned not to work without the Nigerian government or independently of the Nigerian government for years, in this kind of situation, especially in this kind of situation, it's probably the best approach to actually wait and go through and not self-evacuate and go through what the process the Nigerian government has put together. And no matter how messed up it appears to be at this point, yes, I really, for those guys who are on the ground there, they obviously have a better feel of what the environment is at this point. But I would, sitting from afar, look at what typically will happen in those kind of situations, I would actually advise that they go through and follow through the processes put together by the Nigerian government, even for their personal safety, really.
So they should remain sitting ducks in the conflict-stricken zone whilst the Nigerian government.
Let's be a bit. At the moment, I do not. If we're speaking specifically to guys who have gotten as far as the border, we're not speaking to people who are right in Khartoum or right in the shooting in the areas where you have this. Obviously, the guys, if you're within any of the areas areas of direct conflict, it's best that you get yourself as far out as possible towards at least the Egyptian borders. That's the fact of the situation now. Yes, but yeah, if you've gotten that far, I think you just wait for the entire process to play itself out.
Okay.
All right, let's go to WhatsApp, take a couple of messages. This is from Philip, and he says, please note that as Nigerians, despite taxes and levies, we do not benefit directly from our government except through petrol subsidies. If the government removes this subsidy, what do we have? Private schools, private hospitals, private security, water boreholes, no housing schemes, and so on and so on. Let us not be fooled into this arm twisting. We are only going to give them more money to steal. Say no to subsidy removal.
All right, Maureen says, Mr. C is 100% correct. They need funding. Everyone knows that, but they're not singular in this need, and funding is not their only need. All the professional industries are in crisis at the moment. A roadmap of investments would have been more realistic, and that message is from Maureen. Ayokunmi says, all the money saved from subsidies should go to providing refineries That way we save our forex, we ensure we're not subject to external influence like the Russia-Ukraine war. We ensure local supply, and we can earn forex from exporting finished petroleum products over West Africa. Putting the money in healthcare or any other sector or palliatives is treating the symptom and not the cause. Let's take a few messages and we'll continue on the other side. This is Freshly Pressed. Stay with us. Oh, dang. Oh, it's position.
I think we have something.
Okay.
What's up?
Hey. Mr. C. Hi.
Mr. C. Oh, wow. But I don't understand. Between Charles and Camilla?
Look at the picture.
Sorry, Mr. C. Why do most people assume that? Why do most people assume that local production is equals to cheaper charges?
He's in the zone of I don't care.
I'm confused.
I say 8.1, and you're welcome back to Freshly Pressed on Smooth Breakfast. Mr. C and Chibuzor with us, looking at major news stories making the rounds from dailies across Nigeria.
All right, let's move on to Punch. Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center has queried the $800 million that the World Bank, or that has been taken as a loan from the World Bank by the federal government. Now, the executive director, Mr. Awal Rafsanjani, actually goes on to describe the rather nonchalant attitude of the current administration towards the country's crippling debt crisis.
Okay, so thank you, Zibby. This CSO actually does have a point. Now, we received information a few weeks back that the federal government had in fact taken an $800 million World Bank loan to provide funding for palliatives post-fuel subsidy. Now, the first question is this, and I hadn't touched on it before now. There is a process to be followed before Nigeria validly take any loan, and the National Assembly has to sign off on it. Will the National Assembly sign off on this particular World Bank loan? I haven't yet come across any such approval. But beyond that, this is not a grant. A grant is money that you do not have to repay. This is a loan that will be repaid. Now, you're taking a loan not for any productive venture, simply to provide palliative funding for 10 million vulnerable Nigerian families for a period of 6 months. Now, having said that, we've also been regaled with tales repeatedly by public officials that when the fuel subsidy program ends, there will be massive savings coming back to the Nigerian treasury. So if that is the case, and if those stories remain true, remain factual, remain correct, what then was the need to take a loan to provide the funding? Could a portion of these expected savings not have been deployed for that purpose without having to incur the burden of having to repay this loan generations after with interest? Now, you've taken the loan, yet we're not sure when fuel subsidies will. What are the chances that this money will still be properly intact when it's time for deployment? What are the chances it will not be deployed for something else? What are the chances that the incoming administration will not then raise an alarm and say, we can't find this money. So there are a number of questions, and it's not providing any comfort that our public officials tend to be very secretive and less than transparent and open about government dealings and transactions. So this money now, when do they want to start paying it? Given that there's no commencement date for the fuel subsidy removal. And the fuel subsidy removal, is it going to be at once? Is it going to be phased over a period of time? So when do they expect to start deploying this $800 million loan? So many questions. And he also raised issues. There were purchases, so there were purchases by the aviation. The aviation minister announced the purchase of 10 fire trucks at $4 billion. Questions around the due process. Was it followed? Public procurement, was the gate open to the public? Who were the people that bid? Who won the bid? What was the winning bid amount? What is the technical capacity or competence of the party that won the bid? And something we missed in that story was he did promise more was to come. So the 10 was just the initial lot that got in. So you find that with a lot of government transactions, both at federal and state levels, and it's not restricted to the federal level alone, there is a worrying lack of transparency in what the government does. So they're happy to announce certain things, announce figures, but they're not willing or happy to indicate the process and how they got there. So this $800 million bank loan, it's a bad loan. It should never have been taken. Yes, there will be millions of Nigerians who will be affected when the fuel subsidy regime goes. There's no doubt about it. But the proper thing to do is, since you have repeatedly represented that there will be savings from the removal, deploy a portion of those savings to help them not take the first loan.
Well, isn't this apparent to the government? Isn't this an apparent thing to do?
So I like to chip in here. So governments typically sit on various reports. So yes, while you might say it's apparent to the government or clear to the government is doing what it's going to do. Mr. C has pointed out the lack of transparency in some of these agreements and how we even expect to even fund the subsidy. So it questions how we expected to even fund the subsidies to start with, because if you say you're taking savings, it means that you have the money somewhere. But obviously what you mean is that you're taking the money from somewhere to fund another. It's like funding a habit. You're taking a loan to fund a bad habit, and you're saying we're going to make savings from taking those loans. It defies logic. See, democracy is built on some processes or on structures holding other people accountable. So you have the Senate, you have the people who have to hold the government accountable for some of these actions. Not everything is transparent, is obvious to government, and this is not just Nigeria, it happens across the world. What unfortunately happens is that we are less questioning of some of these things that happen in Nigeria, and the government is less accountable to give explanations or responses to some of these things. Hopefully at some point in our future, at some point in our existence as a country, we'll get to the point where the government understands that they're working for the people and they're not doing us a favor. Most times when you hear government officials having to answer questions around this, they sound as if you're bothering them or harassing them and giving them a favor. We've put in several things like the FOI to give some clarity into how to make government accountable, to give clarity about some of the spendings happen. We've not seen a willingness by the government to play according to some of those structures that have been put on ground. There's still that mentality about, hey, we are doing this people if we're making decisions on behalf of the people. Like Mr. C has said at the end, it calls to question even the entire concept of how we are going to save from removal of subsidies. And those are questions that need to be answered when we go into that space in a couple of months or whenever we go into it at the end of the day.
All right, let's go to WhatsApp here really quickly. This is from Kekere-Ekun, and he says, good morning. The DG of NICOM said there are more than 5 million Nigerians in Sudan. How does the government intend to evacuate that number? Good question there. This is from Ted. Ted says, no to subsidy removal. It's all we have for now. Also, those in Sudan should starve at the border, really sleep in the dirt. If you make it to the border, then nothing more to wait for. Thank you for that message. This is from Fabian. He says, the person who's wearing the shoe is more likely to know where it's pinching. Those in Sudan know the true state of what is going on there and should do what they can to get out. The government just takes loans and makes statements, but hardly ever walks the talk. All right, thank you for that message, Fabian. Let's take our next story here. This is from The Punch. Now, the chairman of the Police Service Commission, Dr. Solomon Arase, has approved the salary payments for the 2021-22 police recruits who had passed out of police colleges. This was released in a statement by the head of press and public relations, PSC Ikechukwu Ani, on Sunday.
So when I got this story, when I was looking through this story this morning, I actually had to like rub my eyes and look at it again, because I was looking at it was 2021, 2022, or 2022, 2023. Because it says a lot about how we deal with the police and how, what kind of police we get at the end of the day. These are guys who are fresh into the police. They've gone through the police. They've gone in through the police academy or whatever training system they've gone. They are fresh batch of recruits, and they've not been enrolled into the payments, the payroll service system. They're obviously, some of them, they've been working for the last 6 months, according to this story, and they've not been paid. How do you expect these guys not to be doing roja at the various checkpoints? Really, how do you expect them to feed themselves? Even when they were in the police colleges, where during the training, how did you expect them to keep up with their upkeep? How do you expect them to solve it out themselves today? Don't forget, we're in a country where a good chunk of Nigerians are not in work. Once one member of the family gets a job, every other person is basically clawing and trying to get their own bit of the black tax out of them. These are guys who have got, a lot of these guys, if you ask them why they got into police in the first place, they got into it to make an income. And we are saying that 6 months after being actively in service, and we're not talking about the training period, that they are not on payroll and they're not being paid. We, at the end of the day, would get, unfortunately, Nigerians would get what we've paid for. And in this place, if we've paid for nothing, so we'll get nothing. And probably by this time, these guys have guns, they're working in various points. You've given them power, but you're not paying for them. So what do they expect? We need to get past this point. We knew that when they were being recruited in the first place, there was a plan to recruit. Not enrolling them in the payroll system is not something that happens out of chance. Should have been budgeted for. It's somebody's job to do this. Unfortunately, too many times we have this kind of stories and we have this kind of complaints without seeing anybody paying the price for not doing their job for this. It just feels like it's business as usual. When these guys complain, or when somebody makes a complaint, somebody makes a statement, oh, we'll take care of it, and that's the end of it. Why did it happen in the first place? Those are questions that never seem to be answered in Nigeria. We never seem to take learnings from anything, so we keep repeating the same cycle over and over and over and over again. So, hey, it's a non-story, but it's a story in itself.
All right, thank you so much for that, Chibuzor. And that is all the time that we can take on Freshly Pressed this morning. Thank you to Mr. C as well. And thank you all for all your messages and contributions to the show this morning.
You stay with us. There is a lot more to come on the Smooth Breakfast. Thanks, Chibuzor.